This is what I did. And here I am, first time I released one game. And I would just write about like what I did, and all that stuff is helpful. Like even if you think I released a small game, it wasn't a great game, but even just sharing what you did is so helpful. There's so few people that have actually released a game. Even if your game's not great, share what you learned, share the tools that you used. Say, hey, I used this tool and this happened and I solved this problem. You would be amazed at how much that helps. Even if you think it's so stupid, all you got to do is share what you did. Just write exactly like you're writing an instruction manual. Just write that and then share that like on a site like Medium or Gama Sutra. Twitter actually isn't that great. I'll tell. I bag on Twitter all the time, but I would write a blog on Medium or Twitter or Medium or Gama Sutra. Just write an article saying what you did, but as boring as it can be. It doesn't have to be flashy or anything. And then do a tweet thread where you summarize the biggest bullet points that you did on Twitter, and then link to your article. Those blow up very well, and hashtag it like indie dev or indie games. And let me tell you, doing those two things is like your best shot. I do that all the time. Like I write a blog on my own personal blog. I started on Gama Sutra, and then I'm actually probably after this meeting going to go write a tweet thread about my latest article. Those go so far, and people start to listen to you as a dev. Now, remember that audience that's growing are interested in you as a dev, not necessarily to buy your game, but that's kind of how you start networking by doing that. And it's going to be slow at the start, but it's going to grow. And basically what you do is use that as just to kind of put a flag up that says, I'm an indie developer who is supporting other indies, and people just start reaching out to you. Again, it's slow at start, but people find you. It's amazing how people will discover you. And that's what you should do. And you're just basically saying to the world, I'm a friendly person who shares helpful information. Come work with me. And people are going to be working with you eventually.
Yeah, of course. And I would love to like make the point too of by doing that, you're not just like Chris said, helping other people. What you're really doing, whether it's your intention or not, is you're establishing yourself as an authoritative figure in the space, right? And people really respect that, in addition to the fact that you're just so willing to share that content. And when they look at you as an authoritative figure, not only are you going to get people to come in to help, but they're like, hey, this guy, this gal, they know what they're talking about. And I'm more likely then to approach them to be like, hey, you know your stuff, and I know you were really talking about this, but it gave me the indication that you probably have some awesome ideas about maybe cross-promotion type stuff. And it really helps get those conversations started, or at least people approaching you on that front. I think another good way to look at this too, just a specific example, was actually a previous guest too. I forgot what number the episode was, but he was talking specifically about how to really leverage Twitter, and it's Blue Goo Games. His name's Nicholas. Great guy. He basically did with his own path, focusing on Twitter and other areas as well too. What Chris said is like just sharing content, sharing all that information. And if you ever go through his Twitter feed and the kind of the course that he has went on over the years, he blew up big time. And all that the guy wanted to do was just say, hey, I learned some stuff about Twitter, and I felt, and Twitter's can be a pain in the butt sometimes in terms of really learning everything about it. And I shared it with everybody. And just from that alone, and a lot of other stuff he was doing that, Chris has mentioned too, that's how he kind of blew up. So one out of many examples out there, and to like hone in on Chris's point, like just share stuff on what you're doing. It doesn't matter if it's boring or exciting. I think the places he mentioned are spot on too, like Gama Sutra and other places as well, Medium. Just share the stuff, because then you, like I said, you establish yourself as that authoritative figure. So,
well said. Very well said.
Awesome. So, we already talked about some, ways that people can get started, right? The main one being just get out there, share the content. And I mean, and probably more we can add to that list too is like, hey, you could do maybe, make a post on Reddit to, instead of writing an article. If you don't want to write an article, maybe you can put one on Reddit or wherever in, game dev, indie game dev, whatever subreddits. But I want to get into some more specific, or not necessarily specific, but more advanced strategies. Like, what do you think are some more advanced strategies that indie devs can do to support their communities that involve more than just, sharing advice? Are there any that come to mind?
You could. I don't know. Let me think. Oh, okay. So if it's your dev community, your fellow devs, one of the things, here's what I would recommend. This is a really helpful one too, is just to make recommendations. A lot of this stuff is very tricky. So if somebody's like, God, what, I'm thinking of getting this plugin for Unity or this one, just having that kind of thing, like say, oh yeah, I tried this plugin, it didn't work, but this one did. Save your money, don't buy this other one. Or same thing with like artists. Like I always tell indies, your capsule image is so important. That's the little image of what your game is that appears on Steam. It's those little promotional images. They're called capsules in the world of Steam. In iOS, it's called a icon. But those artists are so valuable. If you find a good capsule artist, you can really increase your sales. But they're very hard to find one that's good. Not that there's bad artists. It's just that there's a certain type of person that can capture a game in an image. It's really like a magic power. So those special artists are hard to find. So I always, if somebody asks me who does my capsule, I share them. That's a helpful thing. Just share what you know if somebody asks, who's a friendly person, not just like some random stranger out there. But share and promote and cross-reference people like, hey, I worked with this marketer. He was really great. She really helped me with PR. These are great people. I would highly recommend working with them. That kind of like person-to-person recommendations are so valuable to both the person receiving it and the person you're recommending, because this industry is very small. It's word of mouth. It's a lot of that. So that kind of sharing that way, super helpful.
Yeah, and it just goes back to what Chris said earlier on in this episode too, was, basically that what he just mentioned is a form of networking, but it's like more, well, let's call it more advanced networking. And it's a pretty interesting strategy in how it works, because like you said, it's like knowing these things, knowing these connections and referring them and recommending them to others is really helpful. And it can benefit you, but more importantly, you're doing it to benefit other people. And leading in with the fact of how you're going to benefit other people in those cases, it's just going to come back to reward you one way or another. I think we even probably talked about it on when we had the episode where we were at PAX and we recorded that panel and shared that discussion with you from there. We talked about the same types of concepts and how you can do that. But again, back to Chris's point earlier on, to really help out on that front, it's really just another form of networking, and it kind of, everything we're talking about, it pretty much comes back into that like kind of group of things, or how it can be categorized as networking, really. So awesome point. And in terms of being a little bit more advanced, where again, like at face value, it might seem counterintuitive, right? But the benefit of it is really, I guess you can call it karma for the most part, lack of better terms. Awesome. So let's before we close here, I would love to talk a little bit more about lessons learned. And one thing I'm curious about, and I know we alluded to it a little bit earlier on, it can be really motivating to support the dev community as a whole, right? But what are some pitfalls you feel developers may fall into if they focus too much energy on the dev community?
Well, my beef is with Twitter. Here's my thing. It's like, I don't think it's bad. I don't hate Twitter entirely. My worry is that developers spend too much time on Twitter. And the reason is, and here's the secret with Twitter, is people think that when they're posting their game on Twitter or they're posting links to their store page on Twitter, most normal people, and when I say normal, I mean like muggles who aren't in game development, actually don't use Twitter very much. It's a very select, weird group of people who actually use Twitter. And it seems like everybody's on Twitter, but that's just our bubbles that we live in. And one thing I find is, and it's surprising to devs when I tell them this, that Twitter is actually, think of it more as not you're talking to your audience who's going to buy your game. It's like you're at a convention. When you post something on Twitter, think of yourself as like at a 24-hour GDC. And when you're posting links or Screenshot Saturday, that sort of stuff, the people who are really engaging with that content and reading it and looking at it are actually publishers, people who run shows, fellow devs who are also making games along with you. So if you spend too much time promoting your game on Twitter, what you're doing is you're just attracting a bunch of people who are your partners. You're networking with them. What you need to do is then take one step further and engage in their community, which is like once you use Twitter to kind of make those connections with other people, and then you say to them, "Hey, you liked my tweet of this image. I saw that you are also making a tower defense game. Hey, would you like to post a link to my Discord in your Discord?" And then what you're doing, that's a level deep because Discord is probably filled more with players or subreddits and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you're doing is you're sharing that community. And so what you're using is Twitter for is to make the connections with other devs. And then you build that relationship with the other devs. And then you dive down and talk to their community through those devs. And that's what I mean that's why I give Twitter a bugaboo about Twitter, is because a lot of devs think that they're promoting their game to fans on Twitter, but Twitter's very few people are actually fans on Twitter. It's mostly other devs sharing screenshots with each other. So that's what I say when I say be careful about spending too much time on Twitter trying to promote to other devs, because that's most of people who are on Twitter checking the game dev hashtag screenshot setters. It's mostly publishers and people in the games business.
Yeah, definitely. And another thing that I've seen too sometimes is, as Chris said, it's really good to kind of use that and leverage that community on Twitter as, a way to get, make those types of connections to network. But one thing I've noticed too in some cases is, if you think about it, most players are probably, I really don't want to kind of like bucket players generally in this, but I'm going to. I'll just say it. They're kind of average users of Twitter, and what I mean by that is they're not like major influencers or typically don't have a huge following. People that do have that are just just regular people that happen to love Twitter. Those numbers are kind of far and few to some extent. So what I've noticed is that if you do follow someone who clearly is a player of your game or really interested in, let's say they're involved in other your Discord and other things like that, if you look at their profile, they're probably going to have like next to nobody that they really follow, and they might be or that is following them, because they don't really use a platform all that much. And I'm not saying it's always the case, but from my experience and obviously from Chris's as well, it seems that those people aren't going to have help as much as the reach and influence that you're necessarily looking for a bottom line. But the dev community as a whole can really help in terms of outreach, connections, networking, and making those other opportunities happen. So just wanted to kind of like emphasize a little bit more of that point you were making with don't get too caught up with, the dev community on Twitter, because remember, at the end of the day, you're going to eventually be selling that game you're making. And you want to make sure that happens and you don't get too excited about things that aren't necessarily going to equate into bottom line results. All right. So one other thing I want to say, because we talked a lot about like, some cross promotions and other things, is sometimes joint efforts with other devs can definitely entail a lot, like getting featured as a whole community on a Steam page, for example. So with that in mind, what's a good way to approach these cooperative opportunities to ensure that they don't turn sour?
Yeah, I mean, I would say go in nicely, have a positive attitude, be nice to people, because when you reach out to these people, there are going to be people that say no to you. They're going to say no because they're the devs who don't understand the magic that we are talking about today. It is like when you are uncomfortable with marketing, you're new to this, you put up this shell because you're afraid the world is going to swindle you. And there are devs out there that just haven't learned that yet. And that's okay. They're on their journey. They're going to get there. I promise you, if you reach out to some devs, they're going to say no, and they might be a little grumpy. Don't worry about that. They don't know that. They haven't learned the gospel yet. So just move on. Don't take it personally. They just don't know yet. And you got to just blanket it. Try a bunch of devs. Reach out to 100 of them. If I could tell anybody, if you get anything out of this podcast, here's what I'd like you to do. This is your homework for anybody listening who's like, yes, I want to do it. I promise I'm going to do it. Reach out to 10 people. Find 10 devs that are working on games or have recently released a game. And it's got to be recent, not like 5 years ago. who've recently released a game that is very similar to yours, and just reach out to them and say, hey, I'm making a game like